Greetings, music nerds, and welcome to Season 8 of the Music Makers and Soul Shakers podcast. This season is brought to you by our newest sponsors, Larrivee Guitars and Fishman Amplification. I'm your host, Steve Dawson, coming to you from the Hen House Studio in Nashville, Tennessee. This season, I'll be taking you on a journey down the many rabbit holes in the process of making great music. I'll be speaking to instrumentalists, songwriters, producers, up-and-comers through legendary veterans, and we'll go deep into their history and their process of creating unforgettable music. This show continues to be listener-supported. You can help keep the show going with a one-time donation or a Patreon subscription. And when you sign up for Patreon, you get an ad-free version of the show, as well as getting entered to win some killer prizes from our sponsors at the end of the season. We have an incredible Chase Bliss Lossy pedal up for grabs, as well as a Fishman acoustic guitar pickup and effects pedals, as well as a pedal from Union Tube and Transistor, and more. You can get links to all this and sign up now at makersandshakerspodcast.com. Meanwhile, many thanks to the sponsors for this season. Please check them out and let them know that I sent you. They are Larrivee Guitars, Fishman Pickups, Chase Bliss Pedals, Union Tube and Transistor, Spectra 1964, and the Hen House Hang. All right, thanks for tuning in, and let's get down to it. Howdy once again, music nerds, and welcome to episode number 167 of the podcast. On the show today is the incredible guitarist and steel guitarist Rich Hinman. I would just like to thank a new Patreon subscriber, Jacob Torrens, to the show. And just wanted to mention that Jacob, is entered into the end of season draw that is coming up, at the end of the season, which is a little ways off still. I got quite a few episodes still coming, but at the end of the season, as I've mentioned, there's a big giveaway. It's going to involve a Chase Bliss guitar pedal, some Fishman pedals and DIs, and some swag from Larrivee, hopefully, and some amazing stuff from Union Tube and Transistor, as well as a DI from Spectra 1964. Incredible prizes. If you're a music kind of person at all or know somebody that is, you could win that. All you got to do is join the Patreon and support the show, and you'll be entered. That's all. You know that already, but I'm just reminding you. Go for it. So on the show today is Rich Hinman, who I was introduced to by our mutual friend, Jamie Dick. He's a great drummer in town here. And at the time, Rich was working on a pedal steel sample library in town here, which is very cool. But the two of them had also been involved in the George Jones, Tammy Wynette TV series a couple of years back, both as players on the soundtrack, but they were also in the band on the show, which was super cool. And he and Jamie had also toured together, I think, with the Milk Carton Kids. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that happened. So I guess that's kind of a cool insight into the fact that what Rich does is get involved in a lot of really interesting work. And he's a great example of someone that's just a killer player, finding ways to make it all happen in this day and age. Rich is a really creative player, and he's definitely spent a great deal of time with the classic steel guitar canon, but he's very much branched out and developed his own style and voice on the instrument, which is what I dig about him. He has a great flair for improvisation, and his tone and touch is really of the highest caliber. Rich is currently also a teacher at Berklee College of Music in the guitar department, but he continues to work in the studio and on the road with various projects. He's had recurring stints with artists like Sarah Bareilles, Maren Morris, Molly Tuttle, Katie Lang, Tanya Tucker, St. Vincent, Josh Ritter, and lots more. His current project is an incredible band with guitarist Adam Levy, and Adam was on this show a few years ago. Check out his episode while you're at it. The two of them go way back, and it really shows because their interplay and group improv is really quite something. So the band is called Rich Hinman versus Adam Levy, and they have a brand new album out called Fan Favorites that you should go check out. We talk about it on this show as if it's not out yet, but it is out now. So make sure you go get it, buy the vinyl, download it, whatever you do, check it out. Rich also put out a solo album recently that's more on the ambient side, but full of really inspired playing as well, and that's called Memorial. He's quite active on social media, which is how I actually first ran into his playing, and he has a cool Patreon thing going on weekly with steel guitar lessons and whatnot, and so you can check out what he's up to over in his world at richhinman.com. And if you get a chance to see him and Adam Levy, who are out on tour as we speak, don't miss them. All his tour dates and all his current projects are all up at richhinman.com, so go check that out. And with that, please enjoy my conversation with Rich Hinman. Thanks for doing this, man.
Thanks for having me.
where are you anyway? I don't really know I don't know much about what's going on with in your life. I do know things, and I want to know other things, but I know that you're teaching at Berkeley these days and also doing lots of touring with various folks. But where do you actually live?
I live in Salem, Massachusetts. So on the North Shore of Massachusetts, which is just like northeast of Boston. There's like a cape that called Cape Ann that just goes out into the ocean. It's really beautiful. And I live in the very, very beginning of that in Salem.
Yeah, I went to Berkeley, so I lived in Boston for
Oh, you did? I didn't realize that.
yeah, yeah, like three years, I guess. I went there, and I was really young, and I couldn't get into much, and I just wasn't doing anything aside from playing guitar. So I know very little about anything other than like 5 blocks surrounding Berkeley.
Yeah, none of my students have any idea where I mean, I live like it takes, I live like essentially 35 minutes away, but none of my students have any idea.
Yeah, anything outside of that little radius was like a giant black hole to me. I'd take the odd little venture into like downtown just to check it out once in a while, but
Yeah,
that's about it.
totally understand that. Yeah,
I want to get like fairly into steel because I'm
sure.
obviously like, as a steel player myself, I'm very interested in all that stuff. We could get really nerdy, and I don't want to get overly nerdy, but I do want to talk about this Berkeley thing for a second because I find that very interesting. When I went there, it was the 90s, and the thought of there being a pedal steel player teaching there is a little crazy. So what's going on there now that has a space for you there?
Well, I teach a lot of guitar, to be clear.
Yeah.
I teach, in fact, mostly guitar, just because people mostly play guitar is something that as a steel player I've found. But what's cool is that we haven't actually sort of made it yet, but I'm sort of in the process of figuring out how to make pedal steel or lap steel like an instrument that you can actually take as your primary instrument at Berkeley.
So currently that is not the case.
Yeah, you have to do all these kind of like workarounds, which the explanations to that like might be a little bit boring or just academic, but basically like, you can do a directed study, which is essentially you do like an extra sort of class with me where you just come in and like we just do steel, and that's great because it's pretty wide open. It's basically just like you get a steel lesson every week, and but you have to sort of I like academically, I don't really understand how people put it together, but some people do that. So yeah, we do that, and like I have like one lap steel student now who's kind of doing that.
Okay.
And then sometimes people kind of like the private lessons, there's these things called proficiencies, like the private guitar lessons where they have to like kind of play out this like series of, scales and arpeggios and all this stuff. And
I remember proficiencies.
Yeah. And so I have one student who's kind of like doing the proficiency on guitar, but we're spending most of the lesson playing steel. And she's just starting steel. Like, so she's just like,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's like every week is like a whole new adventure, and like, it's kind of that interesting time where the learning curve is like really like things really change over the course of a week when someone comes back and they're like, oh, and they like can play this now and they couldn't play it before.
I remember that so well. When I started playing steel, it was probably 2003 maybe. And I'd been playing guitar for, a long time at that point. And I had forgotten that feeling of like noticeable improvement on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's an amazing thing. I mean, the feeling of like, I couldn't do this 2 days ago. And now I can do it. I mean, I actually have some students, I teach a slide class, like a couple of them actually, like, playing bottleneck. And I have a couple of students who come in just having no idea, like having never done it, who like, in a few weeks can do something. And it isn't quite the same because it's not a whole new instrument, but it has that same effect. I remember someone playing something and I was like, you couldn't do that 3 weeks ago. Like you just couldn't. And now you can. And it's a beautiful thing about learning music and learning instruments is like, just like new pathways in your brain sort of
Yeah.
forming all the time. And it's very, in playing steel makes all of that very obvious.
You're teaching bottleneck, but in what context?
Well, the context is a group class. So there's these
Okay.
things at Berkeley called labs, which you know because you went to Berkeley. I assume that it's the same. And yeah, and they're kind of on like style. A lot of them are like style specific. And so I've got two of these slide or bottleneck labs.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, that's also really fun and interesting.
When I went there was nothing like that. And I remember what I did, because I was actually really getting into bottleneck slide at the time. Like I was really into, you know, like Ry Cooder and Dwayne Allman and all these people. But there was absolutely zero place for me to express that. And so I would bring my slide into the reading labs. Because I feel like they put me below my pay grade in the reading department. Like I could actually read okay by the time I got there. And so I was kind of like, well, this is fairly easy. So I just started doing all the reading stuff on bottleneck, which was fun for me. And it actually, like, I still feel like I'm able to read okay on slide today, which is a little unusual, I guess. But I remember my teacher just being like, "You're weird."
Yeah, what are you doing? Totally. I mean, my reaction would definitely not be "you're weird" at this point, but it's I can imagine that playing like little like major scale examples and stuff is probably like very like pretty valuable for like playing slide.
Yeah, and especially getting your like intonation together and all that kind of thing.
Totally. Yeah, just playing like simple stuff where you don't, I mean, I always think this about reading and even playing scales and stuff. It's like, it's nice to play something where you don't have to come up with what to play. So you can just sort of work on like how you're playing it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a kind of like thing at teaching I've really noticed that like, sometimes it really helps someone to just like, okay, let's just do this thing that we already know what it is. So we can think about intonation or whatever, touch or sound or all that stuff.
There was a guy there named Mike Ide. Is he still there?
He actually just passed away like last year.
Oh my God. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. I think he was in his 70s, maybe. I never met him, so I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, he was teaching like country guitar, but he also taught lap steel.
Yeah, and he played pedal steel, and he left a pedal steel there, like with the university, that I just kind of uncovered the other day. That's kind of like a no-name brand, like a random kind of pedal steel. But it seems, I didn't have enough time to really check it out, but it seemed okay. It seemed fine, you know. So yeah, his sort of stuff is still around, but yeah, I think he was the guy who did any of that stuff, like at all.
Yeah, he wrote a few of the books, like there's like a couple of country guitar books via the Berkeley method or whatever, and those are Mike Ide books.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I would think that there's room in the Berkeley method for pedal steel. Like that just seems like such a good fit to me. I'm kind of surprised they haven't done that yet.
I think the issue always with pedal steel, and this is universally the issue with pedal steel, is that it's just like big and heavy and like hard to get a classroom full of people playing pedal steels, or even one person. Right. I mean, I have like currently the student I was talking about who's doing her proficiency on guitar, but is taking some pedal steel lessons, managing to kind of put those things together. That lesson is 30 minutes long. So I'm like, I set up a pedal steel like before. Yeah. And it's got to be there. She just got to like walk in the room and we don't have it's just one pedal steel and we just go back and forth. And
wow.
Sit down. It's like, I always think, and because I've thought about like, oh, maybe I'll do some like workshops or whatever. But it's like then you're like, okay, how do we get everybody playing?
The thought of 10 pedal steel players, even if they're pretty good, playing together gives me the hives.
Oh, definitely not playing together. That's not happening. Definitely not. I mean, even if they're good, even if they're like very good, I'm like not interested in doing that at all. But just the idea of like, okay, we can teach, and then this person play. Like the way that guitar functions is like everyone can sit around with a guitar, and then when it's kind of like your turn to play, you can play. And pedal steel is so impractical that way. So it just makes there are all these kind of like barriers to doing it. But, you know, as far as like, I mean, I think teaching it could function in a not dissimilar way to the way guitar does. You know, I mean, people can learn. And I've always sort of thought this in a way about pedal steel is that like I want my students to learn the instrument the way you're kind of like you end up learning the instrument on guitar, where you know where the notes are, or you know how to play an arpeggio or whatever. Not that that's the most important thing. I mean, the most important thing is playing music, but it's really easy on the steel to just get like stuck in boxes and it like just like
Yeah.
the physicality where it's like I can play this and I can play this in this place, but not really know, like not really be able to connect it musically. Like
totally.
So yeah, I think it would be great if people I'm sort of trying to figure it out now, essentially at Berkeley, but it's in the very early. I'm in my first year of teaching, so it's in the very early stages.
So tell me how you juggle your professional life with your teaching life.
Oh my God, I have no idea.
Like I know, like you've been out on tour with Josh Ritter. So
yeah.
Do they just let you split when you get gigs?
I have to make them up, basically.
Okay.
And it's tough because I teach there 3 days a week. So if this was only a two-week tour that I did whenever it was last month, February. But it was, that's 6 days of teaching that I have to make up. I mean, I don't have to do it in 6 days. I can do it in like whatever other increments, but it's a lot of hours.
And that needs to be like in person in like a physical...
No, it could be over Zoom potentially. And that may be what some of it ends up. I've done some of it and I've a bit more to go. Yeah. It's challenging. I mean, and then just like I've been blessedly like free of having before this of like I don't have kids and like I've just done music now for I don't know like almost 20 years, and so it's like I've been sort of, which is amazing. It's been like very fortunate. So I've been sort of like blessedly free of like these kind of like time constraints. Mm-hmm. And now the juggling is really hard. Is like finding like I'm all because I have a bunch of things. I do a lot of recording from home for people.
Yeah.
I tour. I have my own projects. I have a Patreon that I try to keep up where I teach pedal steel. And like, I feel honestly at the moment, I feel kind of like constantly behind and just like, like I just got an email before I got on and someone being like, hey, so this is the last thing we need on the record. Like, just so you know, and I'm not like crazy late on it or anything, just like a track for somebody like on steel. And it's not like, it's like weeks late. I mean, I'm in contact with people. But it's really hard to find that just like, okay, here's a few hours like where I can just do this.
Right.
Because which seems weird. It's only 3 days a week. Like it doesn't seem, but I'm prepping. The other stuff that I'm doing just gets like shrunk down to smaller space.
Yeah. Is that making you think twice about taking a road gig at this point? It must be to some extent, right?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I love playing with Josh, and I've been playing with Paula Cole kind of off and on for a few years since I've been in Massachusetts, and I love her too. And I don't know if I'd want to do. I don't know if I can do like a road gig that goes out for like a long time. Yeah. Josh's thing is pretty manageable. I mean, we put out a record. He put it, not we. I played on it, but he put out a record last year. I did like a 5-week tour last year, which I was able to kind of get away with because Berkeley hired me at the end of August and the tour was like October. So there was I was like, there's nothing I could do. I had to do the tour and just figure it out. I had subs and stuff at Berkeley. It was okay. And this semester we only did 2 weeks, so that's fine. So this has been pretty chill. But I don't know if I could do a consistent,
like a 6-week tour or something would probably... Yeah,
it's probably out, with like, except there's people that I've played with that I would be like really, that I would like want to play with again. And I would be like, if that was on the table, I would have to really think about it. And I would be like sad about it if I had to miss it. But, I think it's just like a little too hard to do. And I do, I like being home as I get older, as far as touring goes, like I like playing more than I ever did. Like I like playing the most I've ever liked it. But
It's just all that other bullshit that
I
goes
like
along
the
with it.
other stuff less than
Yeah.
I used to.
Yeah.
Like less and less all the time. So
Yeah.
that's part of it too. Is that it's
Totally.
just like that is not, I do not enjoy that part.
And that's it's a nice thing probably at this point in your life to have a steady job that is
Absolutely.
musical, that is cool, and you can be at home, and those are
Yeah,
all
and
pretty amazing things.
yeah, absolutely. And there's like it is also a community,
Yeah.
like it's a school. So it's this big place with all these people. And like I have friends who work there. I have my I played a gig, my own gig like a couple nights ago. And like a bunch of students came out. It like it really it doesn't feel like like it's cool to have a job that's kind of connected to it, that it's like a community of people who are into music, who are working
Yeah.
on music and like interested in it. I mean, I really like that.
Your path to getting there, are you originally from Massachusetts?
No, I'm from New York, actually.
Okay. So, and you spent time in LA, right?
I spent time in LA. I spent time in New York. I lived in New York from like 2001 to 14. And then
Okay.
I lived in LA from like 2014 to 2020.
Yeah.
And then I've lived here since 2020.
So the LA time
Mhm.
that's a pretty fruitful time in
Yeah,
your life as far as like touring with people and recording with people.
for sure.
What brought you there in the first place? Was that something where you had a gig, or were you just like looking for gigs, or what was the thing
No, it
that
was
brought you
like
there?
personal reason. I was in like a
Okay.
relationship, and we uh, at at the time, and she wanted to be. She was from California, is from California, and she wanted to be out there. And it was, it was increasingly hard to. It was increasingly hard. Like New York is really. This is not news to anybody, but it's a very challenging place.
Well, so
Um,
is LA.
So is LA, but honestly, like New York, especially at that time, LA has become more and more challenging. But New York, especially at that time, was it. It's just like the amount of space as you get older, I think, is what really gets hard in New York specifically.
Right. Right.
Like you can
Just
find
living
an
in a
apartment that's cool. Like you can find a place to live, probably, maybe. But like, especially if you know people that already live there and you have some ability to like kind of do it in a informal way. I've always felt like finding apartments in the like normal way is always like the hardest way to do it. And you kind of
yeah.
need to like know people.
Right.
But like, I've been there for a long time, but it was just like you're always in a place that's really small. And you're always like, okay, how am I gonna like what am I gonna do with my stuff? Like how am I gonna if I want to like record anything, how am I going to do that? Like everything
Yeah.
is just kind of wedged into a corner. And so I
Yeah.
think the idea of going to LA and being like, well, it's not cheap, but at least like when you have something, it's bigger.
Right.
Um, was attractive.
What was your working life like at that point? Did you have work that you could go to, or were you kind of like scrambling around trying to put stuff
You
together?
mean when I got to LA,
Yeah.
I was kind of scrambling around.
Okay.
Um, I had been uh, I'd been in like Sarah Bareilles' touring band for a couple of years,
Yeah.
but she had kind of like she was working on her musical and wasn't doing anything. And
She based in LA?
no, she lives in New York.
Oh, okay.
But she had lived in LA. But yeah, I met her in New York, and so her band was mostly people from New York, and it was that was like 2013 and 14.
Yeah.
And then when I moved out to LA, I didn't really have much. I knew a lot. I don't know about a lot of people, but I knew some people who lived out there. Um, but I've always found it takes a really long time to get from the point where people like kind of know who you are and are like, oh yeah, he's cool. That would be cool to play. And like making some connection about who you are and then actually like calling you to do things.
Yeah.
So that took like a long time. I also like I what definitely helped is I like started this band with Adam Levy.
So he was in LA at that point too.
He was in LA
obviously.
at that point, yeah.
Right.
And I've known him since the 90s, like since I was a kid. Like I've known him for I don't know, since like 1995 or something.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, like he was teaching at like a guitar camp that I went to as like
Cool.
a when I was like I think I was like 15 when I was in his class or 14.
Yeah.
And yeah, and he was always, he's the nicest person. And he was like, he treated me not like a peer in like a weird way, but he just like was like kept in touch in like a
Hmm.
really nice way. He like
Yeah.
wrote me postcards and stuff. And then we kind of reconnected in New York when he lived there and I lived there. Like when I finished college, I moved there and then we were like friends.
Yeah.
But we had played together some, but then we like really started this band in 2015 and I had this kind of like idea for this band.
And this was Rich Hinman versus Adam Levy.
Yeah, which is a band we still have.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is great. So yeah, I think that's when we started doing it. And we started playing with Jay and Jen, Jen Condos, Jay Belrose, and people came to those gigs. Like they just came and like it sort of filled a niche that I think is now like totally filled. There's
Right.
lots of like, I mean, I actually don't know about specifically right now, but in the last few years, there's been way more sort of like according to Jay anyway, like it feels like there really never used to be like normal gigs in LA, like where just like it was like people playing in a bar.
Yeah.
That just like wasn't a very common thing.
Yeah.
And I think in the last few years that's really increased. But at the time there weren't maybe that many people doing that. And so we kind of filled this niche and people really liked going to see that band. So honestly, I think that's probably mostly how I sort of started doing things in LA because people would see me with that band and then I like met people and
right. So for that band, let's talk about that band for a sec because I
Sure, yeah.
love that. I love that record. I don't even know what it's called, but I've only heard it on vinyl.
It's called Versus.
Okay. So Versus, I don't know when that came out, probably around 15, 16, something like that.
No, later actually. I think the record came out in 2019.
Oh, okay. So tell me about the way that you and Adam put the music together for that. Do you guys co-write? How do you do the arrangements for that?
So we write kind of individually. There isn't much co-writing.
Okay.
We sort of bring stuff in as needed. It started as basically like the concept was like a bar band, basically, but like an instrumental band.
Yeah.
So we just play like a sort of wide kind of swath of music, so it was just tunes we liked that. And it's always tunes that we like that we think would work like in a, like that have like changes that are interesting to play over that would like sound where the melody is like compelling enough or makes enough sense that it would sound good instrumentally. So some of them are songs that have, originally have lyrics and some of them are like instrumental tunes, but it has to feel like it's something that we can play over, something that would kind of work in a bar. I mean, I'm not talking about like a bar with like chicken wire where it's like people are screaming at you. Like it's just like a bar where like people kind of know what they're in for, but still like a bar,
an enlightened bar.
Maybe an enlightened bar, just where like people are like, it's the kind of thing where it was never really intended to be like, like concert music. Although we've done those kinds of shows too. I mean, it's become a little bit more like that. But then we also write stuff that feels like it tries to fill the same space. So I write things that are like, I have tunes that I think just like don't work in that band, like that would just be too.
Well, I find the tune that your new record, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but the tunes on that record are wildly different from what you do with Adam, which are more kind of the way that those tunes strike me as like they're kind of sprawling melodies that really like are geared towards the instrument, whereas the stuff on your solo record is more ambient and experimental and stuff. But it really feels like tunes when you're playing with Adam.
It is. It's like tunes, and it's like again, I want it to be like it sort of has to be like a chart that fits on one page, basically. Is the way you look at it. Just like, does it fit on one page? If it's more than one page, we're probably not playing it.
Tell me how you write a tune for those. Like, what's your process? Do you come up with a groovy chord progression and lay it down and then figure out a steel melody? Or are you kind of like messing around on the steel and coming up with cool stuff and working around it?
I'm a sort of all at once person.
Mm-hmm.
So like I try to like it always comes from kind of messing around. And to be honest, like in that context, in that band especially, it usually comes from like, I'm not a natural writer. Like I know people that like gear their lives around writing music, and like I'm not really a natural writer that way. So it comes from forcing myself to do it. So like when we were making this our new record, which comes out in May.
Oh, cool.
I was like, I have to write some tunes. And then like, I wrote a bunch. We recorded, like Adam wrote a few. Adam had a couple old ones that we trotted out. We played through a bunch of them. We recorded a couple that we didn't use. You know, it's like that. Like, but I do things mostly all at once. And usually I have a kind of idea, like in terms of chords and melody and like feel and everything. And I usually have kind of an idea of what instrument I'm going to play it on, because things just speak so differently on different instruments, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, there's a tune on the new record that's like a fast, like calypso thing. And I've tried to play it on steel many times just because it would be like, oh, this would be cool. And it's like, it just doesn't work. It's too hard. Yeah. It's like, and when I can sort of do it, but it's this thing. It's like, if something sounds really hard, no one wants to listen to that. No one wants to listen to you like struggle through something, like barely get it, like get 90% of it. I don't know. I don't want to listen to it. So like, then I played on guitar and it's like, oh, that's easy. That's great. That's what it should be. So I try not to fight it, like what it is asking to be, you know, and I've also tried to like learn to allow myself to write stuff that feels a little dumb. I used to really like fight that and want to make things like clever or like interesting. And I found that like, first of all, I've just played enough tunes that I'm like, oh, a lot of the tunes that I really love playing that this band plays that are awesome are like so simple, you know, they just like, but that just have like, that doesn't mean you can write something simple that like doesn't like is just like nothing. But sometimes they just have like, you can find something really simple that has like a special magic to it. And like, that's kind of what I'm looking for. Like something like I kind of want that band to play like mostly tunes that I think are easy tunes.
Yeah. Tell me about the new record then. So I haven't heard it, but you can address it as though it's out, because by the time this gets played, or by the time I broadcast this, the record you're talking about will be out. So what's it called, first of all?
It's called Fan Favorites.
Okay. And is it with Jay and Jen again?
No, it's with so we have a sort of East Coast version of this band now, since we all live in the East Coast, or Adam and I live in the East Coast. And the drummer is Dan Reeser, who I've known for a long time, and I played in Rosie and Cash's band with him. Yep. And Adam has known him for forever. They worked together with Nora Jones. And the bass player is Chris Morrissey, who is kind of one of my closest friends, and is amazing, and also has worked with Nora more recently, but is a great songwriter, and he's kind of in the jazz world too. He like plays with Mark Juliana off and on. So yeah, they're great, and it's a bit of a different energy. I mean, like, you know, part of it is just that like Jay is so specific and unique. That you don't want this thing that's like Jen and Jay light or something. You just want it like
a different thing.
I just wanted a rhythm section that was its own thing. And also I felt this from being around Jen and Jay, like people that I also like love is kind of important to me. Like it's one thing to just play a gig, but it's another thing. It's another thing to like be in a band, you know? Yeah. And like to be playing all the time, and to be like writing and like, you know, in a way, I mean, you know, I make sure they get paid, but also it's hard. Like, it's not like it's an ask kind of to play.
Believe me, I get that, living in Nashville where the bars will pay you like $30.
Yeah. So like, I make sure people get paid, and it's cool, but like, it's still like, it's important that we like that it's people that like that were close, like to me.
So where did you record it?
We recorded it at a studio called The Bunker in New York, where they make a lot of jazz records, with an engineer named John Davis, who's great. He mixed it too.
And did you pretty much set up like a band and play it live? That's
we set up like a band and played it live, and it was the room is kind of small and a little dry, and sounds really good, but it was also like very challenging for me to play like very quietly and very like and in that environment, like without a lot of like natural reverb, like it was like in some ways felt like an unforgiving environment, but it sounds really good and I'm really happy with it.
Tell me about how you record your steel these days, especially in that, let's just talk about that context. So in that band where you've got a bass player, drummer, guitar player, all playing together, you're obviously making some noise in the room. Are you playing through a traditional like Princeton or guitar amp kind of thing?
I have historically mostly just played through guitar amps, like slightly larger than what I might use playing guitar. Usually,
what's your pref?
Kind of like things that are roughly deluxe sized.
Yeah.
So I used for that record, I used mostly a Car Rambler, which is like a deluxe, basically. Yep. They sound really good. So I used that. And I think we did one session where we came back in and like to do another thing. I think actually 2 songs that we redid. One we did for the first time, the song called Saint Anselm, and the second one that I wrote, and the second one is the second one is the Calypso that I was talking about earlier.
Okay.
And I recorded both of those through a Showman. So actually a big amp.
Yeah.
With like a big heavy blanket over it, like a Showman through like a single 15 with a giant blanket over it.
Cool.
It just went in like a completely different direction than.
Why? Is that just something that was there, or did you just and you wanted to try something different?
My gear choices are often are pretty instinctual.
Yeah.
And just what I'm feeling at the moment. And that seems to change a lot, but it was what I was using and feeling. And I actually like ended up recording that. This is a little bit insidery steel kind of stuff, but I just used my fingers on this one tune. Like I didn't play with picks because sometimes it's so weird how this happens. Like most of the time it's fine. And then every once in a while you'll just be like recording with picks and you'll be like, everything will just be like, like everything will be like, just like a shard of like brightness coming at you. It's just like, I was like, it was driving me nuts and I was like, all right, whatever, who cares? And I think I played it with just a thumb pick. And it was I wasn't like blowing on I wasn't doing anything. I was just playing the melody.
Yep.
And it's this very particular sound that I think is really, I don't have nails and I think it sounds really cool, but
I stopped using picks maybe 3 years ago and I haven't used any since.
Oh, really? You don't use them at all?
No.
You have nails?
No.
Wow. Thumb pick?
I use a thumb pick. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask you more about that. What drove you to that decision?
A few things. One of them is what you're talking about, how I just felt like it was like an ice pick with every note a lot of the times.
It can be like that.
And then I hit this point where, and also I hung out with Russ Paul some, and he doesn't use them, and I was like,
he also influenced me that way.
You can pull that off. So, and you seem to be doing all right. And then when I was particularly hit with the ice pick thing, where it was like, wow, these picks are really bugging me. Then I just really strongly asked the question, well, why is it that every steel player has to use finger picks? Like in history, I can't think of one that doesn't, but I don't understand why. Like I don't totally agree with the aesthetic of it. And I just couldn't figure out why, because to me, it feels really comfortable to not. And after that initial 2 weeks of struggling a little bit, I was like, oh, well, this is totally normal. And now I just prefer it. And I don't think I'll ever go back to using picks.
I totally understand. Yeah. I mean, I've discovered this a lot over the years playing steel, that there is a kind of like natural conservatism in
yes.
like not conservatism in the like capital C way, but like in the small C way, where that's just like they're like where I talk to people in a certain part of the steel world, and they'll be like really like, wow, you really use like a Princeton? And you're like, yeah, it's like an amp. I can plug my
Sounds very good.
yeah, it sounds great. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, wow, it's really small. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then I mean, and not to like, and it's taken me a long time to be like, oh, it's okay to do the thing that I'm just feeling.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. Like even just recording the gear choices or whatever for a record, it's like it tends to be just like we're trying not to think about it too much. Kind of just be like, yeah, I think this is gonna work. And I kind of like it's like a first thought, best thought kind of approach. Like I think this is gonna be, I think this is gonna be it. And then just doing that, and then just living with the results, whatever they are. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the other thing for me is like I found that with picks on, the minimum, I don't know what you would call it, but the minimum attack you could get on a string was like way more than I wanted the minimum to be. And just being able to lightly touch a string to me is way more appealing than that, just having that like solid, clear attack. I don't know.
Or being able to like brush across them. You know, there's all these kind of like different sounds that you can access. I've gone back and forth. I do use picks now, and I think I found a way that for myself that they feel pretty good now. But I could go through this crisis again, and like
it is a crisis.
By the time this interview airs,
you'll have flipped 3 more times.
Yeah, it might be completely obsolete. Everything I'm saying.
Yeah. We'll come back to the steel in a second. The one gig I wanted to ask you about, which I've found really interesting, you spent some time with Katie Lang on the road, right? When was that? Was that like in your LA years?
Yeah, in 2017 through 2019 is when I did it.
And was that just something that came across your radar, or like how did you end up getting that gig?
I think Greg Lease recommended me. A couple of different people have claimed that they recommended me, but I'm pretty sure it was Greg.
Yeah.
And
did you cross paths with Greg much while you were there?
Not like a lot. I've talked on the phone with him a few times. I met him in New York when I was playing there once, and he came to it. And it was great because I played this super fun gig and I didn't know he was there, which was awesome.
Oh, that's good.
That's the ideal. I just want, if there's ever anybody like who I really look up to come to a gig, I just never want them to tell me
until it's over.
Until it's over. Yeah. Like I played with Adam the other night, and John Scofield came to the gig.
Oh my gosh.
And I saw him like right before our set, and I was like,
oh no,
the worst. Like, could I just like walk up and just not ever know? Nobody could ever tell me, and we just play the gig and be fine.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. It's like amazing to get to play for people like that. But in any case, I had met him a few times and talked to him a bit, and like we were, sort of lightly in touch. But
so
he recommended me for it. Yeah.
Did you have to audition for it, or was it just like a
no?
Yeah. Nice.
I mean, I think it's funny. Like I don't know what people do. I've all the gigs I've ever done that I've actually like gotten a gig has come without auditioning. Like that has never been really a thing. And I know it is a thing. Like I think in the pop world, it's really a thing. But it's always been like some recommendations, and then someone either sees me play or watches some videos or like whatever, sort of like sorts through and that's kind of what I would do too. Like just kind of like sorts through the like pieces of what they can figure out. Yeah. And I talked around the phone, and then, they just offered me the gig.
And were you playing guitar and steel, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was playing guitar and steel and like mandolin, and I played banjo on one song, which was just like, whatever. It's just, no one was under any illusion that I like could really play the banjo, but like I was able to do it for this one song, and it worked. Yeah. And that's what I did. It was amazing. It was the best. I love her.
That's a nice gig.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really special.
Let's just talk a little bit more about steel specific stuff for a second.
Yeah. Let's get in there.
Now, here's my question to you, because I get caught up in this with pedal steels. And what I struggle with, and I wonder if you struggle with this at all, because we have similar aesthetic tastes, I think, in that we like tube amps and we don't necessarily do all the things that steel players are supposed to do. But what I struggle with is on modern steels anyway, the output level is so high from the pickups that it kind of like screws up any effects that I have. And so I've sort of like, I've added volume knobs to all my steels now to compensate and basically just to turn them way down, or not way down, but like to 70 or 80% down enough where it doesn't make a guitar pedal freak out. And but it also kind of like adds a bit of noise to the whole proceedings. and it also like, it's a really tough thing to reckon with a tube amp, because if you play a modern steel at full volume into a tube amp, you're just going to frap that thing right out. So do you find that yourself, and how do you deal with this issue?
Well, I also have volume knobs on my steels and tone knobs.
Okay. I have a tone knob too on mine now too. Yeah.
And so usually, to be honest, I'll check right now. So this volume is all the way up. Yeah, that's pretty typical. So a lot of times, actually, my volume is all the way up.
Yep.
But my tone knob is back down a little bit. A lot of times it's more the issue, partly the output, but it's also some of it is just the brightness of the thing, especially, the finger, this kind of connects to the finger pick discussion.
Yeah.
To be honest, I like have spent, I don't use a lot of effects. I like try to keep it like in general, I partly out of a kind of laziness and like disinterest in tweaking. Whereas like there are people who really like, like you're an engineer, like you make records at a studio. So like you think about like, signal chain stuff and like kind of tweaking things and EQing things. And like, I like engineer myself for things I do for people, but I am not naturally that way. So I try to be like really instinctual about sound. So it tends to kind of just be like whatever I can find that works. But I have spent a really long time kind of like the amp thing is kind of crucial. So it has to have like just enough output. Like that's really what it is. Like as much as I do, we're talking about Princeton's before, as much as I love Princeton's, like
it's just not quite enough at a gig. I find
really work. Yeah. It does work. I have a neck pickup on one of my steels, and it's a lower. It's like a Russ Paul style pickup, and it's a lower output thing. And I did make like the last Paula Cole record that I am like really proud of how the steel sound. I mean, I didn't necessarily do it. I played it, but like Mike Persani engineered it, so it sounds like ridiculously good. But it's like I use the neck pickup like into a Princeton for like the whole record, and that actually works. Like it feels more like a guitar. But in terms of like if you're playing whatever, like a Lawrence, like a 705 or 710 or something, like it's just a little too much. So I need the amp to be just big enough.
So do you tend to crank the amp and back off the volume pedal, or are you like riding pretty hot into the amp?
Somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Like I can't crank the amp, but if I can like bring it up, but then also I'm always like playing guitar also. So I'm like constantly like the output volume thing is like super, I'm constantly kind of like riding this like line of compromise, and I use like boosts. It's a pain. Like I use boosts a lot. Like the only pedals I really, really use. I mean, I use an overdrive if I like have to make it sound like that, obviously, but like for guitar. But in terms of like playing steel, like I use like reverb and delay, but then like, not always, but sometimes. But then like I have lots of things that do like little boosts and little like EQ things, just to sometimes deal with differences in output, to try to make everything like even and mostly to be comfortable on stage. I mean, one of like the worst feelings is just when you're too loud. Like it sucks just being too loud. Like and just being like I can't like
and being aware of it.
Yeah, and having to like play like a tiny little person because you're just so loud. Like, I hate that. It sucks. So
Yeah.
it's like really trying to find just a place where it's comfortable is what it's like kind of where I'm always like setting things. So I don't know, that's not a great answer, but like I can't, there's some amps I can't really use, but I still like the amp I'm using right now, and I've used a lot with Josh in the last little while is is like a 40 watt, single 12.
That's powerful.
So it's pretty powerful, and it's not ideal for guitar, but it's like, but then I can use pedals on guitar and I can kind of make it work.
What is it? What kind of
It's
amp
a
is it?
Lazy J, which is this company out of the UK.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, so it's, if I wish I could like shrink it down to play guitar in it for like those songs, but I can't. So
Right.
it's for steel, it's great.
What if you are playing at a festival and you have to backline an amp? Would a deluxe cut it for you, or do you find those clunky?
That's fine. I'll just use deluxe. And also like, I'm kind of like, part of me is like, whatever, like I should be able to make this work. And I really believe that. And I believe in not being scared of it. It's been like really an important, because I think I used to be like, oh, what if they bring this and I need to backline it? And now I'm like, whatever, just put like an amp there and I'll figure it out.
For steel, do you ever go into input 2 on a deluxe? I find that
sometimes
that really helps. That sort of solves the issue for me of like, because I don't know what the electronics are exactly, but I know it's probably like 5 or 6 dB down from input 1. So it kind of helps tame how hard you're hitting the tubes, basically.
I do it almost all the time, and I do it on the Lazy J too, which has two.
Interesting. Okay.
Same thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Even though it's a way more powerful amp, but it's still like, it feels better to me.
I'm so glad I'm not the only one.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes.
I mean, like all of my students, like you're definitely not, because like on my Patreon, like half of the questions are just like, what do I do with all this output? And I'm like, I don't know. I try, like we like had many conversations about it. And then some people go the route of like having really lower output pickups, which is cool. Like you can, like that's kind of what Russ does in a way, like it's kind of his solution. And I found that like, I can't, like when I play harmonics and stuff, like I just can't get it to like ring quite the same way. Like I can't get it to like reverberate. I mean, he does, but I can't seem to like for the way I set things and the way I mean, maybe if I just did it for like a year, I would like figure it out. But it's sort of like the learning curve of like having pickups that are that low output has been like, I can't do all the things I want to do. Yeah, in terms of like really sustaining something for a long time, which sometimes is just like kind of like what the steel does.
Yeah. Instrument-wise, what do you have? I've noticed you playing, I think, a Show Pro, right?
I have 2 Show Pros. It's basically what I have. And I have a GFI that I play at Berkeley. That sounds really good. And I've been thinking about, it has a back neck that I don't play, that I thought at one point I would play. And I've abandoned.
Are you strictly an E9 guy?
Yeah, I am. And I've just accepted that. Like I play a bunch of stuff. It's like, okay, at some point I'm not going to do this. This isn't happening. I've been thinking about taking the back neck off and maybe even putting a volume and a tone knob on it. But it's great. It sounds really good.
Is it like a 90s or 2000s?
No, it's like 4 years ago or something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty new.
The Show Pros, do you have a couple of them, like one for touring and one for studio, or?
No, they're just kind of interchangeable. A lot of this has to do with my inability to fix things or how hard to fix things. So it's like...
Someone's just there in case?
Kind of. Yeah. I mean, I don't like tour with 2 steels. That's insane. I mean, I guess people do that, but I don't. But like, it's good to have a backup.
I don't. And I often think that that's foolish, but...
I mean, if you can work on your own stuff, you don't necessarily need one, is my feeling. But I can do the simplest things, and I've gotten better at like not being afraid to do some of those things. But sometimes like you just have stuff and you're like, oh, this got really weird. Why is there this stuff? Okay, what's going on here? And it's like, because they're like so different from a guitar, like, and I've tried to explain this to people like a guitar, like you can just make a guitar work, and like the steel, like things start to break down. It's like an old car, and it's just hard. Like you really have to like know how, if you drive like old cars, you have to know how to fix an old car,
Totally.
And so I have new steels partly for that reason. Like
Yeah.
I'm just gonna work on like a 60s push pull. I'm just
Right.
not that guy. I wish I was, but I'm not.
Yeah.
It may sound amazing, but it's just not gonna happen. So yeah, I'm cool with what I have. I don't necessarily like I don't I've thought about getting push pulls before, but I've like I have a few steels. It feels like kind of a lot already.
Yeah. So when you do a session, like a remote session at home, do you have like, are you using real amps for that, or are you using amp sims, or what do you use?
I for a long time, like over the pandemic, I used like only pretty much an aux box, like
Yeah.
a universal audio aux box.
Yeah.
And
Those are pretty great.
it's really great. And I still use it for guitar stuff
Mhm.
a lot because I can just play really loud.
Yeah.
But I've found that I actually like with the Lazy J, and this was true with the car that I was using also, the Rambler, is that it's kind of like I put like a ribbon mic up to it and just play, and it like sounds really good.
Yeah.
And I don't and like into a, um into like a very simple preamp and like into a, universal audio like Apollo thing.
Yeah.
And like that is great. So it depends, but it's also instinctual. Like I try not to be, I think it's like important for me to not be like dogmatic about with myself about what I think the right thing to use for something is. Like, I think I used to be like that, be like, oh, this is what it is. This is the right thing. This is what I do. And it's like, that kind of like doesn't, like, sometimes you're just doing something and you're like, it's not working. I don't know why it's not working. It's just not.
Mhm.
This sound is not working. Like, I have this session today that I'm supposed to do. Like, I don't know. I'm going to start. The thing I start with now is using like the Lazy J into like a Beyer like M160.
Mhm.
But like, I may try to do that and it may just be like, I don't know why this doesn't work.
Those M160s are wicked mics for amps, eh?
Great.
I don't
It's
know
great.
why I never tried one until fairly recently, and I love those mics. Oh my God.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's like they feel like sort of warm, but also quite realistic. Like it just feels
Yeah.
like it's very like literal, but also not like somehow like sweet. Like that maybe those things maybe sounds contradictory, but
Mhm.
that's what it feels like to me.
But you would opt to do that over using the aux and like not having any volume in the room. Do you have somewhere that you can crank up and?
Yeah, I have this like I'm in the attic of this house. I mean, this is kind of this like old house that we live in Salem, and it's like a house, like a freestanding house, and I'm in the attic, and like I don't find I have to play it that loud to make it work. It can still be pretty quiet. I mean, quiet enough, and I that's been sounding the best to me and the most kind of real, I guess.
True to your sound.
The most like the closest to what I like want it to sound like. But I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of lucky enough to have a few options.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, you're just like, sometimes you do stuff and you're just like, none of these are working. And like, I'll go direct and I'll be like, that works great. I don't know why. Like, it doesn't make sense. I don't have like I usually can't explain why something works, but yeah, that's where I start with the mic on the amp. But I mess around with it.
Yeah, a lot of people around here, Russ Paul included, are using the Iridium these days, which is like a pedal.
He recommended it to me, and I have used it on a bunch of stuff, and I do think it sounds really good. But
it's pretty good, yeah. I don't love it though. There's something about not having an actual amplifier that kind of freaks me out. I don't know.
I find like you know what I think? I think it like I don't think it sounds amazing, but I think it fits in the track really well. And I know like Russ thinks about that a lot, just like how his sound actually sits in the track. And
right.
Maybe probably more than I do. Not that I don't think about it. I instinctually want it to work in the track, but like I think he's willing to cut out a lot more sort of like low end and kind of natural like that I'm not willing to cut out.
Not ready to, yeah.
Even if someone's going to cut it out later, I just like it's like you're going to have to do it. It's not going to be me. Sorry.
Yeah.
uh, which is fine. I'm fine with that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm fine with someone else doing it.
Can you tell me a bit about your Memorial record? So that's the most recent one. And so making a solo record all of a sudden kind of was that something that you'd been thinking about doing for a long time, or was it like a long time in the making?
It's kind of an interesting path for that to happen. Like, my friend Pete Min in LA runs this label, Colorfield
Mhm.
Records. And he they have a very specific thing that they do, which is that they basically like have somebody like me um, come in and just start with nothing. So I mean, he's like, you can bring in stuff if you want, but like kind of the ideal way to work is just to like make things in the studio,
Oh, wow.
like
Okay.
come in and kind of like write and
By yourself or with a group?
by yourself. But like
Oh,
he's there recording it and being like, oh, actually loop this part. You know, he's very active. But it was basically his um he was like, do you want to make one of these records? He's like, this is how it works. Come in and try it. We'll
oh,
take a
wow.
day.
Okay.
And I was like, sure, yeah, I'll do it. And I wasn't even living in LA anymore, but I was there a lot at the time.
Yeah.
I haven't been there as much recently, but it was like 2 years ago or so that I started it. And like we would just, whenever I was there, I would do a day or a few days. And um, I would just, yeah, I would like just continue to uh, like just make stuff. Like I know it sounds really vague, but a lot of times I would sit at the piano. Like a lot of the records, there's a lot of piano on the record,
Yeah. And
or
pump
like
organ, which I love.
pump organ, yeah. And
Was
so
that
I would,
just that's a real pump organ, right?
oh yeah,
That
for
was
sure.
yeah.
He also has like just ridiculous gear, like
Okay.
unbelievable. So a lot of times I would like sit at the piano and come up with something, or sit somewhere and come up with something. Sometimes it was like a synth, and like I am not a technical person at all, so he would often like kind of set it up. Like here's a sound,
Okay.
and I'd be kind of like, okay, yeah, let's
But
do it.
it's you playing it.
It's me playing it, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything on the record, the things that aren't me are very obvious. Like it's like David Pilch playing the upright bass is definitely not me.
So would Pilch come in while you were
Much
there?
later, I think he did his thing from home.
Okay.
Um, Daniel Rodham played saxophone. He came in. It was great.
Mhm.
It was beautiful. Um,
Yeah.
Mark Juliana came in.
What about
Played,
the string stuff? There's like string quartet
there's
on
a
some
string
stuff.
quartet on one song.
Okay.
It's they're called the Section Quartet. It's like a very busy sort of like LA
Okay.
like they do a lot of like
Yeah, we have some of those
they
here.
did like the Grammys or the Oscars, like that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Like I mean, that's the other thing about being there is that you kind of have access to all these kind of people.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, everything that doesn't seem obviously not me is
Mhm.
me. So it's a lot of like me playing. So it's not like there's nothing virtuosic about it. It's just kind of like me getting something, an idea out on the keyboard or on like, some of it is like, even some of it he would set me up with like a sort of like percussion loop or something.
Yeah.
I would like just play just like random stuff and we'd kind of like make a loop out of it and then we'd like play to that. Just different ways to get started.
That's a cool way to work.
It's a really cool way to work. And also like I found that I was actually pretty good at it. Like I think some people are some people who are like real composers, I think really struggle with it. But I think it's kind of the way that like it's actually much easier for me to I was thinking of this earlier, like it's actually much easier for me to talk than it is for me to write, for example, and like words. And it's kind of the same way. It's like kind of if it just comes out really quick, it's like it's it's not like it's all good, but like I can make things really fast. And then we can kind of like go from there and just put things together.
I feel like that would be a tricky way to work if you didn't have a guy like the guy that you're talking about, sort of like helping steer the ship a little bit, because otherwise you would just be like throwing crazy shit at the walls for like days on end.
All the time. And also the access to the sounds and someone being like, try this sound, try this. I mean, that's really
So he was
Not
sort
even,
of curating some things in a way,
not even
almost.
as a gear thing, as like a just kind of like, okay, like we just did this song on this kind of like felt piano, like maybe, okay, so don't do that again. Let's do whatever. Let's start on this, or like there's one that just like I just started on the, I think it's maybe just one song that I actually just started on the steel. He's like, okay, we should just do like a steel piece. Like we've done all this other stuff. You haven't done
Yeah.
anything. You actually just like played steel, like just from the beginning.
Well, that
And so
Buddy song is kind of like that, right? Is that
that's that. Yeah.
okay?
And I basically improvised it. Like I
Hmm.
kind of like kind of came up with something and then kind of like it's like, okay, no, this, let's do it. And then I like had him do, I was like, okay, do a click now so we can, it'll be easier if I need to do anything later. So like, so I'm not completely flying blind. And then I just kind of played it to a click and then put it the other, which isn't very much. I put a couple other things on top of it. But
Right.
that's that. Like that's just like, okay, we're starting with feel. But yeah, by myself, it would be really hard to do. I
Yeah.
mean, it wouldn't come out like that. It's like
Right.
that's really, it's a
Was it
really special environment to do that in.
was that a like a rewarding artistic feeling getting through that process? Like,
Yeah, I loved it. I
uh
really did. Like, I loved it, and I'm really psyched about the record. Like
cool.
I, um, yeah, yeah, it was really fun, and I think it like worked. Like
Yeah.
I think you could do that, and it could not. Yeah, I could see it not working, and I'm usually willing to acknowledge when I do something that doesn't really work, but I think it actually worked.
I think there's a lot of really interesting textural stuff with the synth sounds that you got, that whether he
Yeah.
was curating those or whether you were developing them or whatever.
Just
But
honestly flipping through presets a lot of the time
yeah,
on really cool synths and that I
yeah,
don't even know what they're called and being like, okay, not that. Okay, how about this? And
that's a good
then
way to do it.
that's all I got. Yeah.
I've always loved that mix. There's a band that I love that I'm always surprised when steel players don't know this band, but I'm guessing that you might, called Japan Cakes. Did you ever get into that?
No, I don't know what that is either.
Oh my God, how does nobody know this band? It's like
Tell me more.
it's John Neff from, I think
Oh
he's from
yeah.
the Drive By Truckers, right?
Yeah, I think he is.
He's the steel player,
Okay.
and but then there's a cello player and then a bunch of synths and drums and bass. It's
Cool.
very synth heavy, but basically the lead instrument is pedal steel.
Oh, cool.
And it was like probably one of the bands that like got me into steel in the first place.
Oh, cool.
And
Wow.
they actually have a lot of records, like maybe 6 or 7. And
Interesting.
one of them is all covers of Cocteau Twins songs.
Wow, that is wildly specific and
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, there's this mix of synth and pedal steel that you are also tapping into, that I think, like, texturally, there's moments where you can't tell which one is which, and
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I love, I think a lot of like, we're just playing this, mostly when I'm like making music, I'm just trying to play like the sounds that I'm attracted to. Like you're just
Yeah.
constantly like, I'm just playing the sound that I hear in my head. And
Yeah.
like the sounds that I select on the synth are very often, like sometimes Pete would be like, use this. And it would be something like really abrasive. Not that he's abrasive, but just like he would like want me to do something that like, and I was like, I would always like kind of fight it. And I was always like, just like, I just want to hear, in the end, the thing I want to hear is almost like the sound of a pedal steel. Like they would be, the sounds I was attracted to were like the same sounds. So it kind of makes sense that they just like interact well together.
Tell me about how doing something like that is like wildly different from, say, going in and doing a session for a more commercial, like, country record. Like, you've played on a bunch of that kind of stuff too. Like recently, like, or not, I don't know how recently, but like the Tanya Tucker record you played on, and like Maren Morris and things like that are more like, you got to come in and probably not be in that kind of experimental mindset. How do you approach those kind of gigs when you do those?
I kind of approach them the same way. I know that sounds weird, but it's just like I basically like I've come to terms with like I'm not really like a country steel player. Like there's a sort of language of that music, and like I have listened to tons of it, I've transcribed tons of it, I teach it, but it's like it's not really me.
I totally get that. Like you are your own thing, but I have seen some things like on Instagram recently where you're actually doing like I can't remember what it was, but like you'd actually transcribed a few like classic country solos. I was
Yeah,
like,
like a
hey, that's kind
movie
of
thing or
right.
like,
Yeah.
oh yeah. I mean, I've learned tons of that stuff
Hmm.
over the years and like really listened to tons of it. But I know it when I hear it, I know it when I see it or when I hear it of people who are like that. Oh, you're like, oh, that's you doing your thing. That's not me. And I don't want to fake it. But like, so when I do those things, I tend to play the same way, which is to play a little bit like try to be like a little bit of a string arranger
Hmm.
around the vocal and like kind of think of it that way. And occasionally, like, there are some more like steely things that I'll do because they just feel like they work in
Yeah.
the context. But a lot of times it's like I'm playing kind of like lines that feel like sort of like string lines or like cello lines or something. Like that's kind of, I mean, I'm not thinking of it that way when I'm doing it, but it's like that's what ends up usually coming out. So I feel like it's kind of a specific thing that almost like people understand that I'm not
When
like
you
what.
get calls for things like this, like the Tanya Tucker record and the Maren Morris one, like I'm sort of picking those because they're ones that you've done in the last 4 or 5 years, I think, that
Yeah.
are on the more like, I don't know if middle of the road is the right word, but just they're like mainstream
Yeah.
countryish kind of records. Are you getting the call for those because you're Rich Hinman, or are you just getting a call because somebody said, "Hey, there's a good steel player, you should get him," and they're expecting like hot country licks?
No, I think it's more the first thing
Okay.
because I think somehow people have like, I mean, not a lot of people, but like enough people have kind of figured out that like, oh, this is what this person does. I don't know if it's like they've like listened to all my stuff or anything like, but I think they're just like,
But they know what they're getting into
they
is
know
like
what they're not getting. I
right,
think that's
right, okay.
almost more important in a way. Like they
Yeah.
know what I'm not. And
Yeah.
like a lot of times when people are, I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've been like asked to do something about a session. It's like, we really don't want like any country licks here and
Hmm.
like on this thing. And I'm like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Like, but like the number of that people don't want that
Yeah.
like is really common. And so at least with what I get asked to do.
Right.
So I think that's kind of expected at this point that I'm not going to do that. And then
Was that Tanya Tucker one? Was that Dave Cobb? Was that record?
that, God, who produced it? I don't even know. I think maybe Shooter Jennings produced it. He was there.
Oh,
Did
right.
Carlisle work on? I like Shooter was there. Brandy wasn't there. It was in L.A. It was actually like I think maybe they asked Greg and he couldn't do it.
Hmm.
Like I think it was literally like that.
Were you just overdubbing on those?
Yeah, it was just an overdub. That was so brief that it was like
Yeah.
I sort of sometimes forget that I played on that record. The Maren Morris thing was like I did it from home
Okay.
and like, we really me and the producer really worked on it a bunch together.
Hmm.
So that was a little more like really like figuring it out. But the Tanya Tucker thing was really fast. Like I
Okay.
just went and played and they were like, cool. I was like,
Yeah.
great, I guess. Is that good? I don't know. Yeah, it was just like you sometimes it's like that.
The recent one that you did, the Josh Ritter one, the Spectral Lines record,
Yeah.
that was probably more of like a band kind of like hunkered down in something, or were you overdubbing for that too?
Did it from home.
Wow, it does not seem like that. That seems like one of those like we're getting in deep here in this thing and we're gonna do this crazy shit. But okay.
Did it from home. Yeah.
So were you like a final stage finishing touch kind of thing?
Yeah. And,
Oh,
and
okay.
that's pretty common. Although some of those songs I play guitar on a bunch of stuff there.
Yeah.
And so that stuff is maybe a little bit more, but there was already definitely a rhythm section.
Yeah. Was Josh producing that record himself?
No, Sam Kassir, who's been in his band for a long time, has produced a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
For Josh, but he produced a Lake Street Dive record. He's done a lot of stuff over the years, but he worked on it. And he's like a friend of mine and he lives in Boston. So he's like a local person that, and he asked me to do a couple things and then like, it ended up being like maybe 5 things or something. We are doing a record where we actually go to the studio and play this summer. Kind of interested.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. But Yeah, that was all from home. That
Oh,
was all
wicked.
basically like Oxbox. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I think it's funny, like the um 20 years ago, definitely, like you were maybe people were playing well on records from home, but like if they had like a real studio, you know,
Yeah.
and now like
It's just so easy now. It really
it's just so
is.
easy, and it's so easy to make it sound good. I think
Yeah.
that's what it is. It's just like these are
Yeah.
like real records, and people are like, great, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Like I don't know that but I feel like it sounds good. I send them out and I'm like, yeah, that's like, I approve this sound.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, the sound I get, I will say, like the sound I get on Memorial, I wish I could make it sound like that all the time. And that's like another level of like, I don't even really totally know what Pete is doing. But
Which one are you talking about?
on Memorial, like on Buddy, that steel
Oh, I
sound,
see. Okay, yeah.
because I like those steel sounds are really special to me. And like,
Hmm.
I can't quite make it sound like that on my own. But
Why?
I don't know. I should
Uh,
go ask him exactly what he did. I mean, some of it's through like a DI, but like it's the way he's compressing it, it's the way it's hitting it. I don't really get it. I think also he's sometimes running it through DI and through like a
okay.
Tweed Twin or something. I mean, he really has like the stuff is like the stuff that
Right.
like a Fender Harvard. I like ran through that about. I mean, just like amps that I just like I'm never gonna have because I can't afford them.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
So that stuff is amazing sounding. But like, yeah, I can make things sound really good here.
And so the other thing you're doing from home is the Patreon stuff. Is that something that
Yeah.
that's like a big part of what you do, or is it just like how much are you doing Patreon teaching? A
Well,
lot?
for years I did it. I did like a lesson, like a video lesson once a week,
Mhm.
and I also did some private lessons that were like short, like once a month. I would do like a half-hour private lesson with people.
Yeah.
Um, and once I started Berkeley, I really had to stop the private lesson thing. It just wasn't possible anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and also, I slowed down a bit, but there's a lot of stuff up there
Mhm.
now. And it's kind of like if you're on the Patreon, it's kind of all available. So it's
Oh,
still
cool.
all there. And I
Yeah.
still do stuff like I'll teach a tune or I'll transcribe something and I'll talk about it. Or sometimes like people ask questions just about whatever. Like someone just asked about transcribing and I just like did a little like I basically just like put the camera on and talked about the process and what I do like about transcribing. So it's fun. It also is like I mean, it's all online, but it is a bit of a community too, and it's like a
Yeah.
little bit, I've now been doing it for 4 years,
Oh,
like
wow.
since 2020.
Yeah.
So I've known some of these people like for a while, and then there's some people in Boston who like come to gigs and stuff, and then I see, and then sometimes I play in other places, and there's people who are like, oh, I'm a Patreon subscriber. I'm like, oh, that's great. Like it's really, I love that, and I think it's a pretty good platform. It's pretty simple. Like it's
Yeah.
pretty easy to upload things. It's not complicated. You don't have to like, years ago you would have had, if you wanted to do something like this, you would have had to like really design it yourself or get someone to design it. And like, you just kind of like, you don't have to do much and you just kind of have to worry about like the actual content. And
Yeah.
that's fine. And I like talking about steel and I like
Sure.
teaching. I like, you
Yeah.
know, so yeah, I really enjoy it.
And if people want to see you with Adam Levy, I know like this will be a brand new record by the time this podcast comes out. Is it just like New York, Boston? That's kind of it
Well,
for.
it sort of depends on when this podcast comes out, but we are playing in Nashville at Nelson's Drum Shop.
Oh, you are? Cool.
Yes.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
we're playing it.
But
We're playing in Nashville. We're playing in Minneapolis.
okay.
Well, okay, so we're playing in New York. We're playing,
Nashville and Minneapolis. That's a crazy
yeah,
tour,
we're
man.
playing a kind of like, what we've found is that like if we have like some kind of connection to a place, then
Yeah.
then we can do it and it makes sense. Then we can
Right.
like afford it because we really like to bring the rhythm section.
Yep.
It really makes a big difference. Um,
Yeah, that's expensive. It's not
and it's
easy to do
expensive
that.
and
Yeah.
it's really hard. And it's like, it's hard to make money doing that. So we can do it if like there's places that like we have like some kind of, either we've played there before, we know a lot of people, we have places to stay, like whatever, just some combination of
Yeah.
factors. So like the places can be a little bit like kind of like disparate. Like but when we put the record out, like we're playing the day the record comes out, we're playing at a place called Uncle Chief in Brewster, New York, which is like in the Hudson Valley. Mm-hmm. And a couple of days later, we're playing at Bar Lunatica in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And we're playing at the Lizard Lounge in Cambridge. And then we're like, we have this gig in Minneapolis. We're playing in Nashville, and we're playing in I'm spacing on the name, Greensboro, North Carolina.
Oh, crazy. That's cool.
Also just like kind of a place that we had a connection and it made sense. And that one is a little bit like, we're going to see, that's definitely the place of those places where I'm like the most concerned that people will go. But and we're later in the summer, we're playing in LA, outside of LA.
Okay. So you're getting out there too. Wicked.
Yeah. So we're kind of like slowly, it's a kind of slow rolling album release tour of like when we can do it and when it makes sense to like sort of, and it's always kind of a surgical strike. It's just like, go do it, go home.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you, man, for spending the time doing this with me.
Of course. Thank you. Thanks for asking me.
For sure.
I'm a fan of the show. I just listened to the Lindley episode again the other day.
That was a fun one.
It's delightful. He kept saying this thing. He just kept like he just had all these great like beautiful like turns of phrase.
Lindleyisms.
Yeah, and he was just like, "Oh, that's good. That's good." Like he says that like over and over again. So
I know.
awesome. I love it. I love it so much. I've listened to the interview like many times. It's really great.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, there's a version of it that has both of them combined into one. I don't know if you came across that one yet.
That's the one that I recently listened to. When it came out, I listened to the first one, but I know you guys had to maybe take out the musical examples or something.
I did, yeah. I used to put musical examples in all these, and I've been threatened with lawsuits from Spotify. So I've had to go back and remove it from like 140 episodes or something.
Oh, God. Wow.
Yeah, it's either that or take the episode down. And so I gradually have done it almost, but there's still a few up there like illegally now. But they will eventually be all gone and just archived somewhere secret. I always loved those. I thought they were great, but yeah.
I mean, the examples are amazing, and the Lindley examples,
I know,
are great. And it's like, how else are you going to? I mean, you can hear it, you can find the stuff, but it's like to be able to connect the words with like what we're actually talking about feels really bad.
Yeah, I loved that. I thought it was a cool part of this show that I'm no longer allowed to do.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, the Versus record. That's like you can't get that record anywhere.
Yeah.
But why can't you stream that record?
I think maybe even by the time people listen to this, we'll put it on streaming.
Okay.
But
it was the record that I used to do these sessions pretty regularly with Jamie Dick right before the pandemic, and I'd always put that record on like to set the mood when people were walking into the studio. It was like the perfect vibe setter record.
I'm like, it was done very quickly and without a lot of thought, and I think that's kind of what's special about it. And and I don't know, I think I was in this place where it was like, I didn't want, like, I don't know, I just didn't want to like not make any money doing it, like which is basically what happens when you make a record stream. And I knew we'd sell records, like the band was playing all the time. That was the thing. It was like we were like really.
So it was a conscious decision.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't me being lazy, although I am really lazy about stuff like that. But like, I didn't want to like just be paid $0 to make this record. Like, and it wasn't even like it was that expensive. It was actually very cheap. But like, it was still like, no, we're gonna just.
I get that.
Like,
it's cool.
Like,
it's cool to have something out there
cool,
that you just
can't. And you can listen to it. It's on Bandcamp, so it's not like you only need that. I think having it be only LP would be like kind of feels sort of elitist. But it's available on Bandcamp. Like you can just download it and listen to it. So that part is cool. I do. We've been talking about putting it out streaming like now because the new record is we're gonna put out
Okay.
the normal way. I think just as kind of like like it's a way. I think at the time I was less interested in getting people to listen to it and more interested in like making sure that like I don't know. I think like that band with Jen and Jay wasn't necessarily gonna like tour that much or anything.
Yeah.
So it was more important just to keep this thing like very like
Contained,
small.
kind of.
Contained, yeah. And now I think, we're kind of trying to do more stuff and we're a little more active. So it's actually better for us now if people can just go listen to the record easily. So yeah, you're right. Your sort of like priorities change, but that was the conscious decision.
That's cool. Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. And
thank you. Thanks for
great to
asking
talk to you. And love your plan. And looking forward to seeing you here at Nelson.
Thanks. I appreciate it, man. Good to see you.
Music Makers and Soul Shakers is a bi-weekly podcast produced at the Hen House Studio in Nashville, Tennessee. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. You can also find us at makersandshakerspodcast.com. Thanks again to our sponsors this season, Larrivee Guitars, Fishman Pickups, Chase Bliss Pedals, Union Tube and Transistor, Spectra 1964, and the Hen House Hang. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.